The rain came down in sheets the night Daniel Hawthorne nearly died on a Chicago sidewalk, and the woman who saved him was the one person in the world he'd spent 10 years trying to forget. It happened in seconds. One moment, he was striding out of the Whitlock Tower after a board meeting that had left his jaw clenched and his pulse hammering, his black coat snapping in the wind. The next, a white-hot fist closed around his chest. The world tilted. His briefcase hit the wet concrete, papers fanning out into the gutter like dying birds, and Daniel Hawthorne, worth $4.2 billion, founder of Hawthorne Dynamic, the man the press called the architect of the skyline, dropped to his knees in front of a hot dog cart and a stunned valet who didn't know CPR. The crowd froze the way crowds do. Phones came up before hands did, but one woman didn't freeze. She'd just clocked out of a brutal 12-hour shift at Mercy General 2 blocks down, her scrubs still damp under her jacket, her feet screaming, her mind already on the bus and the babysitter and the $11 left in her checking account. She heard the gasp of the crowd, saw the tall man fold like a marionette with cut strings, and her body moved before her brain caught up. "Move! Move! I'm a nurse!" She dropped to the soaked pavement, 2 fingers at his throat. Nothing. No pulse. She tore his tie loose, laced her hands over his sternum, and started compressions, counting under her breath, her wet hair plastered to her face. Come on, don't you do this." 30 compressions, 2 breaths. She tilted his chin, sealed her mouth over his, gave him her air. 30 more. The rain ran into her eyes. Somewhere a siren began to climb out of the city noise. And then, between one compression and the next, his eyes snapped open. Gray as a winter lake. Unfocused, drowning, searching. They found her face 6 inches above his, found the curve of her mouth and the small scar through her left eyebrow, and something behind that dying gaze caught fire. His lips moved, barely a sound, but she read it. Maya. Her hands stopped. For one suspended second, the whole roaring city went silent in her ears, because no one in this life, in the life she had built, brick by painful brick, knew that name attached to that face. She was Maya Reyes now, single mother, night shift RN, a woman with one good coat and a daughter who deserved better. She was not the girl from a summer 10 years gone, but he knew. Dying on the concrete in the rain, Daniel Hawthorne knew exactly who she was. The paramedics arrived in a blaze of red light and tore the moment apart. They lifted him, shouting numbers, slapping pads to his chest, and one of them gripped Maya's shoulder and told her she'd kept him alive, that she'd done everything right. She nodded. She backed away. She watched the doors of the ambulance swallow him whole, and then she turned and walked the other way into the dark, faster and faster, until she was almost running, because the past she had buried had just opened its eyes and said her name. Maya didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table of her cramped 2-bedroom on the south side, a mug of cold tea between her palms, and watched the door to the little room where her daughter slept. Lily was 9. 9 years old, with a gap in her front teeth she refused to be embarrassed about, and a laugh too big for her body. She had her mother's stubborn chin and her mother's dark hair, but her eyes were gray. Winter Lake gray. The kind of gray you didn't forget once you'd been pinned by it. Maya pressed her knuckles to her mouth. 10 years ago, she'd been 22 and waiting tables at a lakeside resort in Michigan to pay for nursing school, and a young man had walked in out of the sun. He'd told her his name was Danny, just Danny. He wore second-hand boat shoes and a cheap watch, and he laughed like he had nowhere in the world to be. They spent a summer the way you only spend one summer in a lifetime. Late drives, cold lake water, 1,000 promises whispered on a dock under a sky thick with stars. He never mentioned money. He never mentioned the name Hawthorne. And she had loved him with the kind of love that has no insurance, no exits, no second thoughts. Then September came, and Danny vanished. No call, no letter. The number she had went dead. The cottage he'd been staying in stood empty. She'd waited 3 weeks, then 6, telling herself 100 kind stories until a sleek black car had pulled up outside her apartment, and a silver-haired man in a $1,000 suit stepped out and explained with terrible gentleness that Daniel came from a family that did not make mistakes twice, that the boy had been amused by a summer dalliance, that he was already engaged to a girl of his own kind, and that Maya would be wise to accept this check and forget she'd ever met him. The check had been for $200,000. She'd torn it in half in his face. She'd thrown the pieces into the gutter. She had walked back inside with her spine straight and her heart in ruins, and she had never told a single living soul that she was already, even then, 6 weeks pregnant. She'd built her whole life on the belief that Danny had laughed at her and walked away. Now that belief was lying in a hospital bed across the city with her daughter's eyes. He found her, of course. Men like Daniel Hawthorne always found what they wanted to find. 3 days later, a hospital administrator pulled Maya into an office that smelled of new carpet and told her, with a nervous smile, that Mr. Hawthorne's foundation wished to recognize the nurse who'd saved his life, that there was a position. Director of Patient Outreach, a salary with a comma in it she had never seen before, full benefits, a transfer to the gleaming new Hawthorne Memorial Wing. "I have a job," Maya said. "This is a better job." "I didn't save his life for a reward." The administrator's smile cracked. "He asked for you by name, Ms. Reyes. By name. He was very specific." He slid a card across the desk. Heavy stock, no title, just a private number embossed in black. "He'd like to thank you in person." She didn't take the card, but she didn't get up either. And that small failure of will was how she found herself, 2 days after that, standing in the doorway of a private suite on the top floor of a hospital her own son of a city had built, looking at a man propped against white pillows who looked nothing like the boy from the lake and exactly like him all at once. Daniel was 35 now. The boyish softness was gone, planned away into something harder and more guarded. There were threads of silver at his temples and a new fragility to him. A man who had just learned his own heart could betray him without warning. But when he saw her in the doorway, that hardness fell off his face like a mask cut loose, and for an instant he was 25 again and standing on a dock. "You came," he said. "You should rest." "I've rested for 10 years." His voice was rough. "I'm done resting." She stayed by the door. "I'm here because they wouldn't stop calling. I saved you because I'd have saved anyone. That's it. There's nothing else here, Mr. Hawthorne." "Mr. Hawthorne," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You used to call me Danny." "I used to be a lot of things." He was quiet a moment, studying her, and she felt that gray gaze move over her face like a hand. "You hate me," he said softly. "That's good. That's better than I deserve. But before you walk out of here and never see me again, I need to know one thing. And I need you to tell me the truth." He leaned forward, and the heart monitor beside him ticked faster. "Why did you take the money and leave?" "I waited for you. I came back to that resort in October, half out of my mind, and they told me you'd quit and moved and left no number. My father said you signed the agreement. That you cashed the check the same week. Why, Maya? I would have given you everything. All you had to do was wait. The room went very still. What check? Maya said slowly. Did your father tell you I cashed? It came apart between them like a knot finally pulled loose, and what spilled out was 10 years of two people grieving the same lie from opposite sides. Daniel told her his version, that his father, Arthur Hawthorne, had summoned him home that September because the company was in crisis and the old man's first heart attack had nearly killed him. That Daniel had gone, meaning to be back in a week, and that the week had become a month of hospitals and lawyers and a dying father gripping his wrist and begging him not to throw the family away on a waitress. That when he'd finally torn loose and driven back to the lake, she was gone. And his father had calmly produced a signed settlement and a cashed check and told him she'd taken the money the moment it was offered. I believed him, Daniel said, and his voice broke on it. God help me. I believed him for 10 years. I thought you'd sold me. I built all of this. He gestured weakly at the city beyond the window, the towers with his name on them. To prove I didn't need you. To prove I didn't care. Maya's legs had gone unsteady. She found the chair by the bed without meaning to and sat. I tore the check up, she said. In your father's face, $200,000. I threw it in the gutter on Eldridge Avenue and I told him I'd never take a dime to disappear. Her voice was barely a whisper. He told me you were engaged. He told me you'd laughed about me. He said you'd already moved on to your own kind. Daniel closed his eyes. A tear slid down into the silver at his temple. I was never engaged. There was never anyone. He opened his eyes again, and the grief in them was a living thing. He lied to both of us. He kept us apart with the same lie pointed in two directions, and we both believed it because we were young, and we were terrified, and we didn't trust what we had. The monitor beeped its small electric heartbeat into the silence. And then Daniel said, Arthur died 4 years ago. I have spent 4 years thinking the worst thing in my life was a man who'd already left it. I would give every dollar I own to undo what he did to us. Maya should have told him then. The words were right there, climbing her throat. You have a daughter. She has your eyes. She's 9, and she does long division for fun. And she asks about you every birthday, and I tell her a beautiful lie. The words were right there, but she looked at this fragile, powerful man, this stranger who had just had his heart stopped and restarted in the rain. And she thought of Lily asleep with her gap-toothed smile, and she thought, I don't know you. I knew Danny. I don't know what Daniel Hawthorne would do with a daughter. I don't know who else is standing behind you with a checkbook. So she stood, and she smoothed her scrubs with shaking hands, and she said, I'm glad I know the truth. I think it's the only thing either of us needed. Goodbye, Daniel. And she left before he could see her face fall apart. She would have kept her secret. She'd have taken the truth and built a wall around it and gone back to her double shifts and her $11 and her beautiful gap-toothed lie. But the world, having torn one secret open, was not finished with them yet. The man who came to see Maya at Mercy General the following week was not Daniel. He introduced himself as Marcus Vane, and he had the kind of polish that made expensive things look cheap by comparison. The watch, the cufflinks, the smile filed to a fine edge. He was, he explained as he steered her to a quiet corner of the cafeteria, Daniel's oldest friend and the chief operating officer of Hawthorne Dynamic. He'd practically grown up in the Hawthorne house. He thought of Daniel as a brother. And as his brother, Marcus said, folding his hands. I have to protect him, even from himself, especially now. I don't know what you think is happening here. I know exactly what's happening. His smile never wavered. Daniel has fixated on you, the trauma, the rescue, the ghost from his past. It's a perfect storm for a man who just stared down his own mortality. He's not thinking clearly. He's already talked about creating a position for you, bringing you into his life. Marcus leaned in. I've seen this before, Ms. Reyes. The lonely billionaire and the convenient angel. It always ends with lawyers. I'm not after his money. Of course you're not. He produced a checkbook with the same easy gesture another man might offer a stick of gum. Which is why this will be so simple. A clean break, generous. You never contact him again and you walk away with enough to change your life. What's your number? Everyone has a number. The cafeteria fell away. 10 years collapsed into a single instant. A different man, a different suit, a different check. But the same gutter-cold contempt. The same certainty that a woman like her could be priced and removed. Maya stood up so fast her chair scraped. Your father is dead, she said quietly, but his playbook is alive and well. You can keep your money, Mr. Vane. I tore up the last check your kind offered me. I've got better aim now. She walked out. But this time, something had changed. This time, she wasn't a frightened 22-year-old. This time, she'd seen the face of the machine that had crushed her once, and she understood, with a clarity that turned her fear to steel, that it was already moving to crush her again. And the moment she got home and saw Lily doing homework at the kitchen table, gray eyes scrunched in concentration, the steel set hard. No one was going to do to her daughter what they had done to her. What Maya didn't know, what no one knew yet, was why Marcus Vane was so desperate to keep her away from Daniel. It wasn't loyalty. It was arithmetic. For 4 years, since Arthur's death, Marcus had been quietly bleeding Hawthorne dynamic. Phantom subsidiaries, inflated acquisition costs, a web of shell companies in 3 countries through which a slow river of the company's money had been diverted into accounts only he controlled, close to $400 million, all told. He'd been careful. Daniel, brilliant as he was, had been a builder, a visionary, the man who designed the towers. He'd trusted Marcus to count the money. That trust had been the most expensive mistake of Daniel's life. And now Marcus was reaching for the rest of it. He'd spent 18 months engineering a merger with Callaway Holdings, a deal that would dilute Daniel's controlling stake and hand effective power to the board. A board Marcus had spent years stacking with men who owed him. To seal it, he'd arranged his own engagement to Celeste Callaway, the chairman's daughter, a marriage of empires that would make Marcus, not Daniel, the true center of gravity in the new company. The papers were nearly signed. The vote was 3 weeks away. A sudden, sentimental, newly mortal Daniel Hawthorne, a Daniel rediscovering his capacity for love, asking questions, paying attention, waking up, was the single greatest threat to all of it. And a nurse from the South Side who couldn't be bought was a variable Marcus Vane could not afford. So Marcus made a decision. If the woman couldn't be removed with a check, she would be removed another way. Daniel, for his part, would not let her go. He didn't send administrators this time. 3 days after Marcus's visit, a visit Daniel knew nothing about, a town car waited outside Maya's building, and Daniel himself, pale and a week out of a hospital bed against every doctor's order, climbed the stairs to her door and knocked. She opened it on the chain. You shouldn't be here. Probably not. He almost smiled. My cardiologist would agree with you. Maya, I'm not here to offer you a job. I'm not here to fix your life with my money. I needed to look at you and not be dying while I did it. His eyes were soft and tired and impossibly young. I lost 10 years to a lie. I don't want to lose any more to my own cowardice. Can we just talk? One coffee, as two people who used to know each other. And maybe she'd have said no. But behind her, a small voice called out, "Mom, who is it?" And footsteps came pattering down the hall, and before Maya could move to stop her, Lily was there in the doorway gap, peering up at the tall stranger with frank 9-year-old curiosity. Daniel looked down at the child. He took in the dark hair, the stubborn chin, the gap-toothed mouth. And then he looked at her eyes, and Maya watched the breath leave his body as though he'd been struck. Gray. Winter Lake gray. His mother's eyes. His own eyes. The eyes that stared back at him from every portrait in the Hawthorne house, going back 5 generations. "Lily, go back inside, baby," Maya said, but her voice had no force in it. Daniel did not move. He could not seem to move. When he finally spoke, his voice came out cracked down the middle. "How old is she?" Maya's hand tightened white-knuckled on the door. "Maya." A whisper now. A plea. How old is she? The whole long lie of 10 years balanced on a single point, and then it tipped, and there was no stopping it. "She's 9, Maya said. "She'll be 10 in March." Daniel Hawthorne, who had built a skyline, who had $4 billion and a heart that had just learned how to fail, put a hand against the doorframe to keep from going down a second time. "She's mine," he breathed. It wasn't a question. "She's ours." And from the gap in the door, the gray-eyed girl looked up at the strange, weeping man, and then at her mother, and asked, with the devastating directness of children, "Mom, is that my dad?" There is no version of that conversation that goes easily, and theirs did not. Maya let him in because the hallway was no place for it, and she sent Lily to her room with a tablet and a promise to explain everything soon. And then she stood in her tiny kitchen across from the father of her child, and they had it out in furious whispers. "You knew," Daniel said. "When I was lying in that bed telling you my father had stolen 10 years from us, you knew I had a daughter, and you said nothing." "I didn't know you." Maya's whisper shook. "I knew a boy named Danny who vanished. The man standing in front of me runs an empire. I have spent 10 years protecting her from people exactly like the people you surround yourself with. I had no reason to believe you'd be any different from your father." "I am nothing like my father." "Your father offered me $200,000 to disappear." Her voice cracked like a whip. "And your business partner offered me a blank check in a hospital cafeteria last week to do the same. So forgive me if I wasn't sure your world had changed." Daniel went still. "What did you say?" Marcus Vane. He found me at work. He said you were fixated, that you weren't thinking clearly, that he had to protect you. He offered me a blank check to walk away and never contact you again." She watched the color drain from Daniel's face. "I assumed you'd sent him." "I have never," Daniel said, very quietly, very dangerously, "sent Marcus Vane to do anything in my private life. Marcus doesn't know you exist to me." His mind was visibly racing now, the brilliant engine that had built a company turning over and catching. "He came to you unprompted, with money, to make you disappear before I could—" He stopped. Something cold and clarifying moved through his eyes. "Before I could what?" What is it I'm about to do that frightens Marcus so badly he's burning his own money to stop it? He pulled out his phone. Maya watched him open an app, then another. Watched him go very, very still. "The Callaway merger vote is in 3 weeks," he murmured, as if to himself. "Marcus has been pushing it for a year and a half. It dilutes my control. I signed off on it because I trusted him with the numbers." His thumb moved. His jaw tightened. "I always trusted him with the numbers." He looked up at Maya, and there was something new in his face. Not the grief, not the longing, but the cold, focused fury of a man who has just felt the floor of his own life turn out to be a trap door. "I need to see the numbers," Daniel said. He didn't sleep for 2 days. Maya knew because he called her at 3 in the morning and again at dawn, not for comfort, but because she was, suddenly and strangely, the only person in his life he was certain wasn't lying to him. He brought in a forensic accountant he'd known since college, a quiet woman named Priya Nadar, who owed him nothing and feared no one. And he gave her one instruction: follow every dollar and don't tell a soul. What Priya found over those frantic days turned Daniel's grief to ice. The phantom subsidiaries, the inflated contracts routed through a shell in Luxembourg, the slow 4-year hemorrhage of nearly $400 million, every artery of it tracing back, when you pulled hard enough, to accounts that belonged to Marcus Vane. And threaded all through it, the Callaway merger, the mechanism by which Marcus would convert 4 years of theft into permanent control, sealed with a marriage, ratified by a board he had purchased one favor at a time. "He wasn't protecting you from me," Priya said grimly, sliding the dossier across Daniel's desk. "He was protecting himself from you. The moment you started paying attention to anything outside the towers, the moment you started looking at your own life, you became a risk. The woman just happened to be the thing that woke you up." Daniel sat for a long time, looking at the photograph clipped to the file. Marcus Vane, smiling his filed-edge smile, at a charity gala with his arm around Celeste Callaway. "He grew up in my house," Daniel said. "I'm sorry. My father trusted him. I trusted him." A muscle worked in Daniel's jaw. "He sat at my father's funeral and held my mother's hand." He closed the file. "The merger vote is in 9 days," he said. "If I move now, he'll know I know, and he'll bury the evidence and run for a country that won't extradite him. If I wait for the vote, he'll have the company." He stood and walked to the window, to the city he had built, the lights of it spreading out below him like a galaxy he'd hung himself. "He thinks I'm a sentimental fool who got soft the day his heart stopped." He turned back, and for the first time since the rain, Daniel Hawthorne smiled like the man who had conquered a skyline. "Let's let him keep thinking that, for 9 more days." The next 9 days were the longest of Maya's life, and somewhere in the middle of them, almost without either of them noticing, the wall between her and Daniel began to come down. He met Lily properly, not as a billionaire, not as the answer to a checkbook, but on his knees in Maya's living room, building an absurdly elaborate marble run out of cardboard tubes because his daughter had mentioned once that she liked them. He was terrible at it. Lily bossed him mercilessly. He laughed in a way Maya hadn't heard since a dock under summer stars, and when Lily fell asleep against his arm during a movie, he sat frozen for an hour rather than risk waking her. And Maya watched the most powerful man in the city be held captive by a sleeping 9-year-old and felt something in her chest she'd spent 10 years holding shut. "I missed all of it," Daniel said quietly, his hand resting careful and astonished on his daughter's dark hair. "First steps, First words. Every birthday. I'll never get any of it back. No, Maya agreed. There was no point pretending otherwise. You won't. I'm not asking you to forgive that. Good, because I can't. Not yet. She paused. But she gets to have a father, Daniel. That's not about you and me, that's about her. So you're going to be a good one, or you're going to answer to me, and you have not seen me angry. Daniel looked at her for a long moment in the blue light of the television. There she is, he said softly. The girl who threw $200,000 in a gutter. $200,000 I could really have used. I know. His mouth twitched. It's the most expensive principle I've ever heard of. And Maya laughed, surprised, helpless, real. And for one moment, the 10 years fell away, and they were just two people who had loved each other once, sitting in the dark with the proof of it asleep between them. It scared her more than Marcus Vane ever had. The board meeting to ratify the Callaway merger convened on a Thursday morning in the glass cathedral on the 40th floor of the Whitlock Tower. Marcus Vane arrived radiant. Celeste Callaway on his arm, her father, the chairman, beaming, the board members nodding, the future arranging itself precisely as he had spent 4 years arranging it. Daniel arrived quiet and pale and slightly stooped. Every inch the diminished, distracted, recovering man Marcus had described to anyone who'd listen. A man whose grip on his own company had loosened along with his grip on his own mortality. Marcus rose to present. He spoke of synergy and the future, of stability in the wake of his dear friend's health crisis, of the wisdom of consolidating leadership in steady hands. He looked, more than once, with theatrical compassion at Daniel. None of us, Marcus said, wants to see Daniel carry a burden his health can no longer bear. That's kind of you, Marcus, Daniel said, rising slowly. Since we're on the subject of burdens, before we vote, I'd like to share a brief presentation of my own, in the interest of full transparency to the board. It'll only take a few minutes. A flicker crossed Marcus's face, but he could hardly object to transparency. Of course, he said, though I'm not sure the timing. I'll be quick. Daniel nodded at the back of the room, and the lights dimmed, and the great screen behind the chairman lit up. The first slide was a photograph of a hot dog cart on a rainy sidewalk. 6 weeks ago, Daniel said, my heart stopped on the street. A stranger saved my life. It made me do something I hadn't done in years. It made me pay attention. Click. So I started paying attention to my own company. And I found something. Click. The Luxembourg shell. Click. The phantom subsidiaries. Click. The inflated contracts. The diverted river. The slow 4-year hemorrhage laid bare in clean forensic columns. Every artery traced and labeled. Every dollar named. And at the center of the web, ringed in red, one name. The cathedral of glass went utterly silent. Marcus Vane's face had gone the color of old paper. These are doctored. This is a fabrication. Daniel's not well. You all know he's not well. Priya, Daniel said. Priya Nadar rose from the back of the room, dossier in hand. The records are authenticated and notarized. Copies were delivered this morning to the SEC and to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois. She set the dossier on the table. Mr. Vane diverted $381 million from this company over 4 years. The Callaway merger was structured to convert that theft into permanent control before anyone could trace it. Chairman Callaway had gone very still. Celeste had let go of Marcus's arm and stepped back from him as though from a fire. "You sentimental fool," Marcus hissed at Daniel. the polish gone, the filed edge showing at last. You had everything handed to you. The name, the company, the genius, all of it fell into your lap, and you never even had to count it. I built this. I ran this. While you played architect, You stole, Daniel said simply. From the company my grandfather built. From me. You held my mother's hand at my father's funeral, and you stole from me the whole time. He stepped closer, and despite the pallor, despite the recent scar over his heart, there was nothing diminished about him now. And the strangest part, Marcus, you'd have gotten away with it. You almost did. Do you know what stopped you? Marcus said nothing. 2 security officers had appeared at the doors. A nurse from the south side wouldn't take your check, Daniel said. That's all. You priced everyone in your world, and you assumed everyone had a number. But she didn't, and because she didn't, I woke up. He almost smiled. You should never have gone to see her, Marcus. That was the moment I knew. They took Marcus Vane out of the glass cathedral in front of the entire board. The merger died on the table. By the end of the week, the U.S. attorney had frozen his accounts. By the end of the month, he'd been indicted on 17 counts, and Celeste Calloway had publicly and permanently severed every tie. The $400 million, most of it, would be clawed back through the courts over the years to come. But Daniel didn't stay to watch the rest of it unfold. The moment the room emptied, he loosened his tie, walked to the window, and called the only person he wanted to tell. "It's done," he said. "It's over. He's done." "How do you feel?" Maya asked. Daniel looked out at the skyline with his name on it, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a wall he'd built to keep out the past. "Free," he said. "I feel free." "Maya, there's something I need to ask you and Lily in person. Tonight. Not as a billionaire, just as me." He came to the South Side that evening, not in a town car, but in a beat-up rental he'd insisted on driving himself, wearing jeans and an old sweater and carrying a grocery bag. "I'm making dinner," he announced when Maya opened the door. "You don't cook." "I'm going to be terrible at it." He held up the bag. "I figured we could be terrible at it together, the 3 of us." And they were terrible at it. The pasta stuck. The sauce was too salty. Lily declared the garlic bread structurally unsound and reduced both adults to helpless laughter. Daniel learned that his daughter wanted to be a marine biologist, that she was afraid of the dark but pretended not to be, that she'd been telling kids at school for years that her dad was an astronaut on a very long mission. He had to leave the room for a minute when she said that. Maya found him in the hallway with his back against the wall and his hand pressed over his scarred, repaired, finally awake heart. "I'm not going to be an astronaut," he said hoarsely. "I'm going to be a guy who shows up every day for the rest of my life, if you'll let me." "That's the only kind of father she needs," Maya said. "Money doesn't do it. Towers don't do it. Showing up does it." "And you?" He looked at her, and 10 years stood between them, all the lost time, all the grief and the lies, and underneath it, stubborn and absurd, and still alive, the summer. "I'm not asking for 10 years back. I know I can't have them. I'm not asking you to trust me yet. I haven't earned it. I'm just asking you to let me earn it, slowly, however long it takes." He swallowed. "I built an empire to prove I didn't need you, Maya. It was the loneliest thing I've ever done. I'd give all of it away to do something with you instead." Maya looked at this man, the boy from the lake and the billionaire who'd brought down his own betrayer in a glass cathedral, the father weeping in her hallway over a daughter he'd just met, the only person who'd ever called her by the name she'd buried. "Slowly," she said. It wasn't a yes to everything. It was a yes to the only thing that mattered. A door, left open instead of locked. From the kitchen, Lily called, "Are you guys going to stand in the hallway being weird, or are we having dessert?" Daniel laughed. Wet, ragged, free, and Maya took his hand, and they went back in to their daughter. A year later, on a clear March morning, 3 people stood on a weathered wooden dock on a Michigan lake. Daniel had bought the resort. Not the way the old Daniel would have, to own it and conquer it, but quietly, and only after Lily had said she wanted to learn to swim somewhere with no chlorine. He'd given most of the empire over to people he trusted now, and kept only what he wanted to build, which turned out to be much smaller and much more important than a skyline. He showed up to every recital. He learned to cook 3 things passably. He still couldn't build a marble run to save his life. He and Maya were not married. Not yet, and maybe not for a long time. And that was all right. Some things, having been broken once by people in a hurry, are worth taking slowly. But that morning, standing on the dock where it had all begun, with the lake throwing back the light and his daughter shrieking with joy as she splashed in the shallows, Daniel reached over and took Maya's hand, and she let him. "I keep waiting to wake up," he said. "I keep thinking none of this can be real." "It's real." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You just had to stop building long enough to notice it." Out in the bright water, Lily came up sputtering and triumphant, gray eyes flashing, and hollered, "Dad! Dad, watch this." And Daniel Hawthorne, who had once been worth $4 billion and felt poor, turned to watch his daughter as though she were the only thing in the world that had ever been worth anything at all. And she was. The girl who'd thrown a fortune into a gutter had been right about everything. Money didn't do it. Towers didn't do it. Showing up did it.